So every year, India's budget comes out. And look, for every single one of us, it's way more than just a bunch of numbers. It's really a roadmap for the country's future. It's a report card on how our money, your money, is being spent. And this year, the stakes feel higher than ever, right? There's all this talk of transforming India, especially with everything going on globally and the whole AI boom. So let's dive in and see what was promised versus what was actually put on the table.
I mean, if you listen to the finance minister's speech, the vision was absolutely electrifying. We heard about a brand new semiconductor mission, 7 high-speed rail corridors, hubs for medical tourism. The list of these huge, ambitious projects just went on and on. It was honestly easy to get swept up and believe that this massive transformation was literally just around the corner.
Okay, but here's the thing. Big announcements are one thing. The real story of any budget, the one that actually matters, is always hidden in the numbers, the actual financial data. And when you start digging into the spreadsheets for this budget, a very clear pattern starts to emerge. It's a pattern that, wasn't exactly highlighted in the speeches, and frankly, it paints a very, very different picture.
So in this explainer, we're going to do just that. We're going to follow the money. We'll start with the basics, the nation's purse, then we'll see how that money is, or maybe isn't, being used to build the future of India. We'll look at the huge issues of jobs and farming, and finally, how the budget is setting us up for the global challenges that are definitely coming our way.
All right, first up, let's get into the nation's wallet. To really understand the budget, you got to start with the absolute basics. Where's the government's money coming from, and where's it all going?
So take a look at this. You might think taxes are the #1 source of cash, but nope. The single biggest chunk, that purple slice right there, isn't taxes. It's borrowing. Nearly a quarter of all the government's funds are from loans. And what's the next biggest piece? Well, that's income tax, from people like you and me at 21%. That is a massive part of the budget coming from debt and from the common person's wallet.
And where does that money go? Well, after the states get their share, the second largest expense might actually surprise you. A whopping 20%, that's 1/5 of the entire budget, is just spent paying the interest on past loans. Think about that. That's a huge pile of money that's gone before a single rupee can be spent on a new school, a new road, or a new hospital.
And this chart, this shows a really major shift in who's footing the bill. It wasn't always like this. In the past, as you can see on the left, corporate taxes and individual taxes were much more balanced. But now, look at the right. The tax burden on big corporations has been getting lighter, while the pressure on individuals, well, you can see from that growing stack of cash, has just been going up and up. So now let's see how all this plays out in the sectors that are supposed to be building this developed India we hear so much about, like education and health. Do the flashy headlines match the hard numbers here? Let's find out.
The announcements for education, they sounded fantastic. 5 new university townships, girls' hostels in every district for STEM students, content creator labs in thousands of schools. These are really forward-thinking, exciting ideas that absolutely grab headlines.
But here comes the reality check. For over 60 years, experts, and even the government's own policies, have recommended spending 6% of our GDP on education. But as this chart clearly shows, the actual spending is less than half of that. So think about that the next time you hear how crazy competitive college admissions are. It's not just a population issue. It's a direct result of being chronically, systematically underfunded.
And guess what? We see the exact same story in healthcare. The headlines were really positive. Upgraded medical institutions, training for thousands of new caregivers, even these new medical tourism hubs. All sounds great.
But then you look at the numbers and, yep, that familiar pattern shows up again. The World Health Organization recommends countries spend 5% of their GDP on health. India's spending? It's stuck down at around 2%. So again, while the announcements sound amazing, the actual investment on the ground remains far, far below what's needed for the kind of quality, affordable healthcare that people deserve.
Now this is even more shocking. We heard all about high-speed rail and economically empowered cities, but the actual money for urban development, the funding for basic things like water, sewage, and public transport, has been cut by 11.6% compared to last year. A cut!
And speaking of our cities, let's talk about pollution for a second. In the previous fiscal year, the government allocated about 8.5 billion rupees to control pollution. Sounds like a pretty significant amount, right?
But the key question, as always, is about the follow-through. How much of that money that was set aside was actually put to work on the ground to clean up our air and water?
Less than 2%, I'm not kidding, of the 8.5 billion rupees that were allocated
only $160 million were actually spent. It suggests that even when the money is technically there, the will to really tackle the problem might be missing.
Okay, now let's turn to two sectors that affect the livelihoods of the vast majority of Indians: jobs and agriculture. This is where it gets real for millions of people.
For jobs, the headlines were all about these big strategic sectors: semiconductors, textiles, and so on. The budget announced several long-term schemes to boost these industries, but these are all indirect measures. What the numbers are missing is a direct, large-scale program to deal with the immediate employment crisis that millions of young people are facing today. And for agriculture, the whole headlines versus numbers pattern is just incredibly stark. The big announcements focused on niche areas like fisheries and some high-value crops. But when you look at the actual budget and the policy details, there's a huge void. The core issues, the ones affecting the vast majority of farmers, things like minimum support prices, the cost of fertilizers, support for farm workers, they were pretty much ignored.
And finally, let's zoom out. How does this budget prepare India for the massive global challenges on the horizon? We're talking about things like trade wars, constant supply chain disruptions, and of course, the rise of artificial intelligence.
Now, the budget does take some serious steps here. It promotes self-reliance with schemes for things like semiconductors, and it tries to boost exports. And to attract AI infrastructure, it offers a huge 20-year tax holiday for foreign companies to build data centers here. But this raises a really serious question. These centers use an immense amount of energy and water. For a country already facing resource challenges, what's the long-term cost of that going to be for the common person?
So, here it is, the crucial point, the pattern we've seen again and again. Whether we're talking about education, health, urban infrastructure, or agriculture, we see these grand announcements that sound incredible, but they are consistently followed by modest, stagnant, or in some cases even reduced funding in the actual budget numbers.
And that leaves us all with a final, critical question. And this isn't just about this one budget, it's about how we analyze all government promises going forward. When we look at the plans for our nation's future, we really have to ask ourselves, which is telling the real story, the words in the speech or the numbers on the page?